What's up, y'all? Kenny here. Today I'm gonna talk to you about Freud, Sigmund Freud, a little bit. I'm a little sick, so bear with me. He was born 1856 in what is now known as Czech Republic. He was born in either March or May. They don't know due to either just a fluke slash random error, or um, one guy theorized that his mother may have already been pregnant. And mind you, his mom was 20 and his dad was 40 at the time. His dad had three wives, and he had two kids with the first wife, none with the second. With the third wife, which was Sigmund's mom, he had 8 kids with, of which Sigmund was the oldest. So altogether, he had 9 siblings. Either way, he was the favorite of his mother, and he was very smart. So flash forward a couple years, it's spring of 1884. He becomes incredibly interested in cocaine. Why? Couldn't tell you. It's crazy either way. Either way, though, he began using it and basically encouraged everybody he knew to use it as well because for him, he hadn't found any negative side effects yet. So that happens, and eventually he gets to a friend who is a morphine addict, Fleshel Marcel, however you say that. Probably butchered it, my fault. Either way, he was a morphine addict. And so I guess Freud thought he could get him off of that addiction if he gave him cocaine. He did. He ended up being addicted to cocaine and died a coke addict. And Freud himself wasn't ever addicted to cocaine, but he did become extremely addicted to nicotine, which led to his cancer of the palate and jaw. And it got even worse because he had to wear like a prosthetic device, of which he called the monster. And those things kind of pestered him, and he was in pain essentially every day for the next 16 years of his life. Mind you, he smoked 20 cigars a day and continued to smoke cigars even after that happened. And so, Sigmund Freud, he got a lot of things he'd known of. One of them is his psychoanalysis and what he did with him there. The crazy thing is, a lot of the components of his psychoanalysis and how he discusses it and such was already out there before he came along. But for some reason, him and his people, because of their approach to it and so-called originality within the section, he's kind of the head of the snake in the way those people went about it at his time. He believed that we were driven more by instinct than reason, and Darwin's ideas with animals kind of figured that in just because of the connection that animals and humans have with each other. He came up with the seduction theory, which in a very basic form means essentially hysteria is caused by the repression of sexual thoughts, whether or not they're true. Which, again, hearing stuff like this now, you're just like, what were they thinking? He came up with a lot of things, obviously. One of them being the psychopathology of everyday life. It was one of his books, articles, whatever you want to call it. And it consisted of parapraxis, overdetermination, and religion, which, by the way, he was not a big fan of. Another theory of his was theory of personality, which involved the ID, the ego, and the superego. The ID, meaning the it in German, dealt with instincts and libido, however people say it. The ego, or I in Latin, coordinated the relationship between the ID and the physical world. And finally, the superego handled the rights and wrongs of life. Super being the over the I, superego over I. So those being the rights, things that matter more than me, is how I interpret it. Or even the do's or don'ts. Eventually, he died in 1939. And the way he died is kind of crazy, and I never knew this. But he had his physician literally inject him with centigrams, or whatever the word was, whatever the measurement is, of morphine. The recommended dose was 2, and he was getting 3. And he was getting 3 every time he became restless over the course of 2 days. The next day, it said he eventually lapsed into a coma and passed away from those injections. He passed away on September 23rd of 1939, lived to be 83, and his wife lived to be 90. She died 7 years later. So Sigmund Freud, crazy dude, said things like the fact that essentially everything in life that is of pleasure is also essentially sexual. So anything that's sexual is pleasure, and anything pleasure is sexual. So one of those things discussed is the fact that, like, the relationship we have with our mom is because of how she treats us, and essentially we become jealous of our fathers because of that. Either way, dude's crazy. Appreciate y'all for listening. Have a good night.